Jim, I'm going to give you a brief introduction and we'll let you go ahead. So honored to have you here to talk with us about what this conference is really all about. So in manner of introduction, Jim Freeze, the AA Associate Administrator for the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters, which is a relatively new organization. He's responsible for the development of NASA's lunar and Mars architectures and defining and managing the systems development for NASA's Artemis program and planning for NASA's Moon to Mars exploration integrated approach. And I want to say that Jim is a formerly retired NASA civil servant, but NASA wanted him and he wanted NASA enough to come out of retirement. I think that says a whole lot. And he is the recipient of the Presidential Rank Award, the NASA Distinguished Service Medal, the NASA Outstanding Leadership Medal, the NASA Exceptional Service Medal, the NASA Significant Achievement Medal, and numerous other awards. And in private conversations with Jake Bleacher, he says he is just making this organization rock and roll. So without further ado, Jim, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Just really great introduction. And thanks, Jake, for saying that. I'll talk a little bit more about Jake later. And thanks for letting me join you. I'm actually in London right now. We are having a Moon to Mars objectives workshop. I'll talk more about that in a little bit on the objectives. But this workshop is with all of our international partners. And I actually just left the science track. So we have 4 tracks. And I spent the post-lunch period over here in the science one because I always talk about our exploration, human exploration being science first. So I really wanted to hear from the scientists. The strange thing was I was the only non-PhD in the room, so I was a little bit intimidated. But it was tremendous to hear how people from across the world, I think there's 15 space agencies here, how they view the objectives in science that we have brought forward. So I'm excited to share our overview of exploration here with you today. And I also want to thank Kate Calvin for the invitation. We have such an incredible chief scientist in Kate, and in her short time at the agency and my short time at the agency, I've learned a great deal from her. So you go to the next slide. So, I think it was interesting today. Our Kurt Vogel, goes by Spuds, opened the discussion here talking about 53 years ago today. That one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, I think is always great to think of on this day. And especially with where we're going now with putting the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the moon, how we're advancing across the board in everything that we do and continuing to take those giant leaps. And when I take a step back and think about the parameters that we're dealing with in defining our architecture, you think the number of people we're hoping to walk on the moon and the time that they'll spend on the moon. On Apollo, it was 12 people for 80 hours. And we're looking for our missions to have 80 hours of EVA when we talk about getting four crew on the surface. So, but what that comes with is not being complacent. And one of the things that I've really tried to push into our organization is developing with a sense of urgency. We can't have the stretch out of some of our programs that we've had before. We need to stay focused on getting things done in a timely manner because our stakeholders, including all of you in the room there, are depending on it. And that urgency is what I try and instill every day. I was talking earlier this week and even today that we have a rocket in the VAB and we're talking about 30-day missions on Mars in the same day. And I think that that kind of aspirational discussion in both aspects should drive us. So you can go to the next one. I talked about the objectives. We've been presenting the Moon to Mars objectives for a number of months now. And one thing that Colonel Pam Melroy has instilled in us is a constancy of purpose. I think we've been very lucky to make it through a presidential transition and keep our goal of the moon. I always say to people, I've been in the agency where we were only allowed to talk about the moon. We were only allowed to talk about Mars, and at times we're only allowed to talk about neither. So getting through that constancy of purpose is really important, and sticking with the plan. We're trying to get to one architecture. That's what we're going through this objectives for. Early next year, we're going to have an architecture, and then stick with that plan and deliver. Ultimately, when we split human exploration into two organizations, my job is to develop the hardware and deliver it. We don't want to spend another 3 years thinking about architectures. I'm not sure how many of you have seen the chart of how many humans to the moon and humans to Mars studies have been done over 50 years. Shortly after Apollo, there was a plan to go on to Mars. We want to get that architecture picked, and we want to move on. That doesn't mean we close out the architecture. And the other thing too is we have to realize we're not going to get the budget every year. And that leads to how do we partner, both with private industry and with international partners. The objectives are really our buoys to make sure we stay on target to the plan we put in place, and that plan has science front and center to it. I mentioned sitting in the science track, the opportunity to talk to you here today, and that science is really dependent on our constancy of purpose. We're also developing a blueprint for exploring the solar system. We are going to the moon. We can do excellent science there, but we need to understand the environment that we're going to operate in to learn. We have to learn how our systems operate in microgravity, so that we're asking those right questions to develop the next generation that have systems that have to operate in a microgravity environment or a partial gravity environment. We're not staying at the moon forever. That doesn't mean we're just going to the moon and moving on. It's really that destination that is the treasure trove of valuable and fascinating science, where we can stay a long time and do that in partnership with others as well. We'll be able to develop a whole new generation of technology as well. Technology that we'll be able to share with other folks there. The objectives that we're putting in place have things like infrastructure as one of the categories. We need infrastructure there for landing pads or for power distribution or for communications. But we'll be able to share those with others and hold up really our end of the bargain. This is difficult. I at times, for those of you that know me, can tend to be a little bit of I'll say a smart aleck. I might have heard that once or twice growing up. And, I say if this were easy, everybody would be doing that. And, I encourage folks to realize that this is hard and talk about how hard it is, but that's not an excuse to not deliver or not really having that sense of urgency. It's really important that the commitments we get in budget or commitments we make to our stakeholders, including the science community, including international folks, we have to honor those, because that's how we set ourselves up for success. I really ask everyone to really not lose that constancy of purpose. As soon as, if you've watched our video of the objectives online, Spuds Vogel talks about how when we lose that constancy of purpose, we start getting, as he puts it, in our cylinders of excellence. We have to make sure that we react properly when there are changes, and not look at it as a setback, but finding a way to move forward. Because there's a lot invested in the architecture we're going to develop, and there's a lot is depending on the results of the science that we bring back. We have to make sure that we listen to all the inputs we have. We have a tremendous decadal, planetary decadal, that for the first time is defining what humans are going to do on the moon. We have to turn those objectives into really actionable things through our architecture. But every system we build has to somehow enable science and keep that in mind. You know, from the SLS rocket to the Orion that's taking us there. Artemis 1 has science on it today, science in Orion, CubeSats that will do science. So we're doing science from the beginning. Some of our further out elements like Gateway have science already enabled, a heliophysics payload from NASA. We have international science already being built. You know, our landing system, how can our landing system help take science instruments down to the surface for us? Where can our rovers, both pressurized and unpressurized, take us? The suits, what can we integrate into the suits to do that science as well? We have to maximize that science return. The more science we do, the more we learn about the moon, the more informed we become, and the longer we can stay to enable our technology. You mentioned Jake earlier. You know, I know you've heard from Jake yesterday, and Jake is a tremendous advocate and frankly leader in the organization in helping us make sure that we have that science integral. You know, we have a stake in budget under Jake, and you know that for you all, because we see the value of Survey's contribution. I know that Jake, I will say Jake represents you very well, and will continue to work with the science team to make sure that we understand the exploration needs going forward. We've set our new organization with strong connections to science, both at the top level, in the architecture, in the concept development, and then in the hardware being developed in the Artemis campaign. This is a campaign. This is a set of missions that we will put together. I had a discussion with OMB recently where they said, hey, you're having a problem on this mission. What are you going to cut from this mission? And I probably still, have my high idealistic goals. And I said, I'm not cutting anything because my job's to get a campaign done. And I can't think mission to mission. I need to do a campaign that brings knowledge of our system, keeps the crew safe, and brings home science. And Survey's a great example of the investments that we make to have the connectivity with the science community to meet those goals. Now, I really hope as we set out a plan that is very clear, that we communicate it, that we spend less time worrying about funding. I'm not saying we're ever going to be not worrying about it, but less time doing it. Instead of defending why we can't do things, let's defend what we've put in place and how we're doing. And really just trust in the fact that we'll do everything we can so that folks can really focus on their work. Go to the next one. We need help though too. We're trying to define the science that we do, and we're completely intertwined. We have the investigations that feed into better exploration technology development and more robust systems. What we're learning on the moon of how the human system is going to work is incredibly important to Mars, let alone the technologies and systems we're bringing. Survey's modeling and analysis is going to help us understand the environments we're exploring and the work we'll need to do for human exploration that brings that value. We've gone through gap assessments within our organization and in Kathy Leader's organization in space operations, and have traced Survey's objectives directly to those gaps. So Survey is essential to help us filling the gaps that we have. That knowledge on the moon that we'll gain will help us develop systems and concept of operations that will be successful and help enable the science community to get what is needed out of Artemis. And that same knowledge will require flexibility really from all of us. And we'll have to continue to evolve our systems and and our plans as we understand the environmental conditions. We recently had a discussion about spacesuits. And as you can imagine, we get a set of requirements in anything, but in spacesuits in this example, and we want to gold plate it. And we don't take into account how we've learned. If you just look at spacesuits, what we've learned about EVAs on space station over the years, we need to have that same kind of evolution with what we're doing on the moon and as we go on to Mars. And this is where things like that come into play, and where we need to help understand exactly what we're dealing with. I mentioned about going to the moon is really difficult, and it is long term, and that frankly, that's why we have been tasked with it. We're going to do the hard things and continue to do those because we're capable, and it's not just NASA. Right? We do this as a community, and that's where we need to come together. And we're the only ones that are capable, in my opinion, of putting a person on the moon. And I think as I sit in London with our international partners here, that really there's an international community that's relying on us, all of us, to go back, and we have to work together along the way. And we much like ships, right? We rise together and fall together. And that long-term presence is really only possible when we build to learn more about the lunar environment. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person when my boss says, hey, you're going to go to this thing in London. I go to this thing in London, but I'm glad I had the chance to talk to you, and please know that your interests are incredibly important to me. Jake is number one. He's a hockey coach, so he's a good person out of the gate, but he happens to be an excellent scientist too. So I appreciate his work. I appreciate what you're doing, and please let me know how I can help. Things that you hear that are bothering you, I'd rather know about, because as I mentioned, we all have to pull together to keep this moving forward. So thank you very much.
Jim, this is Greg Schmidt, Director of Survey, and I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time, particularly when you're on international travel. I also want to say that to a person, this community is 100% behind what you're doing. Am I right? So this is just fantastic. Our institute's been around for 14 years now, and we're on the precipice of a great journey. We've been talking about this for a long time, and here we are. So wow. So Jim, do you have time for perhaps a question or two, or please let us know.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So our first question here is from Jack Burns. So Jack, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Jim. Question about maybe some confusion with regard to sustainability in the moon, because we keep hearing certain individuals at NASA headquarters and the centers talking about not getting stuck on the moon. And that sends a very mixed message, I think, to our community that, we don't have an agenda that would be sustainable for the moon. I wonder if we could get people to stop saying we don't want to get stuck on the moon, and instead look at how the moon is in itself valuable, scientifically interesting, and of course it also is going to help lead us to missions to Mars.
Yeah, thank you, Jack, for the question. It's interesting. We have had a lot of back and forth on that topic. And I think when you hear folks say we don't want to be stuck on the moon, there's probably a better way to say it. What we don't want to do is be the sole owner of everything that's needed to have a presence on the moon. So we're trying to encourage other folks as fitting into what we want to do on the moon. The first step is the objectives. So what we don't want to be responsible for is what I highlighted earlier. Like, do we want to own all the communications? Do we want to own all the infrastructure that's needed to sustain on the moon? What we want to do is we want to be able to still go to the lunar surface, but do that using a collection of assets that are not just our responsibility. So I'm not discounting what you're saying. I'm trying about using that terminology, but that I think is what is really meant by it. I'll work on that though.
Okay, great. Let me ask if there's any more questions here in the audience, and I don't believe that there are any on. Okay, yeah, there is one more question in the audience.
This one's a little bit of a fun one. Chris and I from Sierra Space, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Since we'll be listening to some live talks here in Boulder, I was hoping you could give us a teaser of the announcement that's in 45 minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about where we are with Artemis 1. And, you know, we came back from the wet dress rehearsal and knew there were some things we had to, we knew there was a set of work regardless of what happened at wet dress that we were going to have to do before we could go out to launch. We had one event at a wet dress that prevented us from pressurizing. So when we came back, we knew we were going to have to work on that and some general repairs that we know happen to the foam as we cycle through it. That I'll say that we got a little bit of surprise with what we found, and we're on the cusp of maybe I'll say missing our next launch period because of what those repairs would take. We actually finished the repairs over the weekend. It involved getting inside the back end of the rocket, and that is just dangerous because once you get in there, you start bumping around, and so there's a lot of consternation about could we get it and still have a chance at our launch period 25, which is ends on September 5th. The team got the back of the vehicle opened, went in and made the repairs. Now we're trying to close out of that and look ahead. Do we still have a chance for this launch period? This launch period is very desirable because it is has long class missions, so we get to spend more time in space. It's a daytime launch, and it has large launch windows each day, like 90 minutes to 2 hours. So we're still going to push to try and go at in this launch period 25. The next launch period opens September 19th, but has very short launch windows, nighttime launches at the beginning, and short in-orbit missions. So the latter part of launch period 26 is good, but we still feel confident to try and go for this launch period 25. We are aligning our schedules to do that. You'll hear the processing folks talk about what remains. And look, there's a lot of folks that are nervous. So as you try and talk about these things, they get nervous about saying, hey, we're setting a launch date. We're not setting a launch date. Even if this problem had never happened, you don't set a launch date till you have the flight readiness review. But we're going to talk about, I'll say exactly what I just said to you, and talk about still pressing for this launch period 25, which gives us launch dates at the very end of August and 2 days in September. So keep rooting for us, please, and we'll see where we get to in that launch period. Obviously, we want to launch when we know how we have the highest probability of success. So we're not going to do anything silly, but right now, I think we're in a good position to press forward. So that's what you'll hear at the top of the hour.
Well, Jim, we all wish you luck with this. We wish all of us luck with this since we're in this journey together. I just want to say thank you again. And I want to emphasize that we, Survey, are your institute, and this is your community here. We so appreciate what you're doing to raise all of us up to this wonderful thing that we call the moon that we see every night, and that this community has been so excited to go to for so many years now. And we were, you may not be aware, but Jessica Watkins recorded a brief message for this group from the International Space Station. And she of course, is a geologist and is part of this community. And as I mentioned, who knows, maybe the Neil Armstrong of the 21st century. I think there's a lot of people here that would certainly like to see that. And so thank you so much for joining us this morning and for leading this organization and making these things happen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all you do. And I'll tell you what, it is the greatest job. When Pam called me and asked me to do it, it is one that there is no way I could turn down, because it is a passion, as we all in the space business have. So thanks for everything that you do and for allowing me to be part of it today.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Have a good rest of your meeting in London. Bye-bye.